So looking after your rope is really important. If you look after it, it will look after you. I'm just going to give you some indicators today of things that you should be watching for. I'm going to start with double braid, which you'll find on most cruising boats. Now, double braid is load bearing in the core and in the cover. So it's really important that you inspect your double braid, and if there's any damage to the cover, that you should think about replacing. But also think about what's doing the damage. It's all very well to take a piece of rope out that's damaged, or if you put a new piece in, that new piece will equally be damaged. So if there's something picking at the cover, or you've got any sharp 90-degree cuts sticking out of the rope, that indicates that there's something in the system that's sharp, and you should get a rigger involved to diagnose that, so that when you do spend money on good quality rope to replace it, you don't damage it straight away. So things to look out for that you will see as your lines age is discoloring in covers and a slight abrasion to the cover as well. This is a brand new piece of D2 Racing, which is a 24 plat polyester cover. This is the type of rope that was on the last Clipper race. So this rope here has done 40,000 nautical miles and is in fairly good shape. There's not too much abrasion on it. We've brake tested it and it's only lost about 20% of its brake load. So 40,000 miles in and that rope is in great shape. You can see the difference between new and the rope that's done the miles. So this doesn't need retiring. This rope is still on the Clipper boats and will get replaced just before the next race. So even when rope looks a little bit worn, that's quite acceptable. The things we're looking for is anything that's picked or fluffing, as we just discussed with double braid. Obviously D2 Racing has a Dyneema core. That Dyneema core doesn't like heat and it won't like abrasion or anything sharp. So if you're starting to see wear in your covers, then that's a good time to think about where's that wear coming from. If I'm going to replace, is there anything else that needs replacing hardware wise before I do that? We quite often see people replace ropes but not replace clutches. If you're replacing a halyard, it's well worth replacing the guts of the clutch at the same time, because that clutch will have bedded in on that rope. If you put a new rope in, that will change the setup slightly. In terms of diagnosing issues with Dyneema ropes and covers, so if we look at this is a halyard off a 49er, and this is basically cover is blown in the cleat. The load has been just too much for the cover and it's parted company. So that's clearly a replace. But if you start to see cover damage in that area around a cleat or any block or any picking, then it's well worth getting ahead of that, because obviously if you do this during a race, that race is over because the cleat won't function. This is a piece of R8. This is a moth main sheet that's come back to me. It's triangular in places, and I'd say this is definitely on the end of its life. If you want to check, because covers do often show wear, you can always pull a cover out of a Dyneema rope, and that will give you a much better indication of what's going on internally. So here you can see the core is very compressed. It's quite a lot of fluff on the outside, which is where those microscopic Dyneema fibers have just started to fray off and chafe against the cover. So I would say, looking at the wear on that rope, that's definitely time to replace that. The other place that Dyneema is going to wear is internally. So like a piece of 3-strand mooring line, if you pull an old 3-strand mooring line apart, you'll see that it's worn some grooves within itself. And Dyneema is doing a similar thing as a braided rope. And this is why we coat it so heavily. So if I pull this very heavily used piece of Dyneema apart, we can get a close-up shot into there. You can see that the fibers have started to pull off as this is bent cycling over a sheave. Internally it's worn, and you can see the fluffing here, but also externally you can see that the fibers are very heavily abraded there as well. This is the internal part of the splice, and you can actually see this is fairly rock hard where the splice is compressed it inside. You do get that kind of cold moulding on Dyneema where it's hooked over a shackle, and there's not necessarily anything wrong with that. It doesn't indicate that the rope has passed its life. It just will cold mold itself onto whatever it's around. So again, with Dyneema, you get chafe with Dyneema, but also it doesn't like sharp objects. So if you've got any fibers sticking out and there's a 90-degree cut on them, that's definitely time to replace, but also to diagnose what that problem is and where that cut came from. So you've got the internal visual inspection, you've got an outward view on chafe and any sharp objects. You know, the rope's going to tell you by and large what's happening to it. It's a question of whether you're paying attention and you spot it. And if you see the damage, replace early, get a rigger involved and get some expert knowledge on it to make sure it doesn't happen again.